We are studying in the book of Proverbs. And I mentioned this last night at the at the end of class, last week, at the end of class, that we'd take a look at this. Probably for this section, I will read through these just so we don't take too much time on this particular section. But it is interesting and quite fascinating, some of the repetition that you see in Proverbs. And before I forget, it ended up at the end of my notes because I was trying to keep all this together that I got from one brother. But I ran across some of these from different places, but some proverbial quips about the book of Proverbs. One fella said, Proverbs is like medicine. You can't live on it alone, but few can go through life without it either. Proverbs is like life in that it is a collection of sayings with seemingly no logical arrangement, outline, order, or progression. Another one says, Proverbs is for anyone wise enough to listen. I like that. And then a good summary theme, we've probably said this before, but a good summary of the theme of the overall book is from Proverbs 1, verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. That said, I want to look at this section. I've just called it, well, in fact, I think he calls it, it's from Brother Bob Winton's commentary on Proverbs. And anything Brother Bob Winton, it's W-I-N-T-O-N. I sometimes want to pronounce that Witten for some reason. I think it's just saying it too fast. But anything Brother Winton has done is actually available now through GBN for free, electronically. So if you're ever interested in taking a look at his commentary on Proverbs, he has written quite a few of those, and GBN got the rights to those, and so they've made those available on their website, and those are always available free of charge. I think you can view them there online or download them. But in his material on Proverbs, I think it was kind of in the introduction, he talks about some repetitions. I've mentioned one or two of these, but there are, six categories of these. Sometimes you have a whole proverb that is repeated in essentially the same words. It may not be exact word for word, and I'll read these from the King James Version, but sometimes it may be word for word in a slightly different version. But just for consistency's sake here, I'll read all these from the King James. But these are essentially in the same words. Proverbs 14:12, there is a way which seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. Proverbs 16:25, there's a way that seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. That one, yes, is word for word in the King James. 14:12, 16:25. 21:9, it's better to dwell in a corner of the housetop than with a brawling woman in a wide house. Leroy mentioned this to me a few nights ago. A few classes back, we were talking about proverbs that essentially repeat in the same words. So 21:9 says, it's better to dwell in a corner of the housetop than with a brawling woman in a wide house. 25:24 says, it is better to dwell in the corner of the housetop, so a slight change there, than with a brawling woman and in a wide house. So again, almost word for word. 22:3, a prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. 27, verse 12 says, a prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. Again, word for word in the King James. 20, verse 16, take his garment that is surety for a stranger, and take a pledge of him for a strange woman. 27:13 says, take his garment that is surety for a stranger, and take pledge of him for a strange woman. Word for word in the King James. So some are repeated in the exact same words or essentially the exact same words. Now, number 2 category of these repetitions that you'll see, some proverbs are slightly changed in their form of expression. Here are just a few examples. Proverbs 10, verse 1. The Proverbs of Solomon was kind of like a little heading section there for the section. But he says, a wise son maketh a glad father, but a foolish son is the heaviness of his mother. 15, verse 20 says, a wise son maketh a glad father, but a foolish man despiseth his mother. So it's slightly changed, but very similar. 14:20, the poor is hated even of his own neighbor, but the rich hath many friends. 19:4 says, wealth maketh many friends, but the poor is separated from his neighbor. So it kind of reverses the first line and the second line, but saying very, very similar things. 16:2, all the ways of a man are clean in his own eyes, but the Lord weigheth the spirits. 21, verse 2, every way of a man is right in his own eyes, but the Lord pondereth the hearts. So a slight change there. 19, verse 5, a false witness shall not be unpunished, and he that speaketh lies shall not escape. Proverbs 19, verse 9, a false witness shall not be unpunished, and he that speaketh lies shall perish. So very, very similar language there, wording rather. 20 verse 10, diverse weights and diverse measures, both of them are alike, abomination to the Lord. 20 verse 23, diverse weights are an abomination unto the Lord, and a false balance is not good. And if you miss some of these, if I go too quick, like I said, I'm going to move kind of quickly through this, but if you want a copy of this, I'll be glad to share it with you. It's in Brother Winton's commentary, but I will go ahead and forewarn you. I went through that, and unless it's updated on the GBN site, I had an electronic copy. Actually, I think I downloaded it from the GBN site, but it's been a few years. But there are a fair number of typos in these. Just maybe it's numbers that got transposed in the verse references. But like I said, I can just run over here and make copies for you if you want copies of mine. Proverbs 21, verse 9. It is better to dwell in a corner of the housetop than with a brawling woman in a wide house. 21:19 says, it is better to dwell in the wilderness than with a contentious and an angry woman. So you see that section of Proverbs that are slightly changed in their form of expression. Number three category is Proverbs are sometimes nearly identical in form, but different in sense. Just a couple of these. Proverbs 10:2 says, treasures of wickedness profit nothing, but righteousness delivereth from death. 11:4 says, riches profit not in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivereth from death. 13:14, the law of the wise is a fountain of life to depart from the snares of death. 14:27 says, the fear of the Lord is a fountain of life to depart from the snares of death. So you see the similarity there in the repetition. To me, these last three are some of the most interesting ones because you'll see number 4 category here. Some proverbs contain the same first lines, but then the second line will be different. Here are a few of those. Proverbs 10:15. The rich man's wealth is his strong city. The destruction of the poor is their poverty. 18:11. The rich man's wealth is his strong city, and as an high wall in his own conceit. And most folks think that's the idea of he views his riches as like a city would view their walls. It protects them, keeps out the enemy. In other words, it's a warning against trusting in riches to protect from things that money just can't protect you from. And so it's a warning against trusting in riches. But you see the exact same first line. 17:3, the finding pot is for silver and the furnace for gold, but the Lord trieth the hearts. 27:21 says, as the finding pot for silver and the furnace for gold, so is a man to his praise. 17:25 says, a foolish son is a grief to his father and bitterness to her that bare him. And 19:13 says, a foolish son is the calamity of his father, and the contentions of a wife are a continual dropping. This fifth section of looking at some of these repetitions is where you have proverbs that contain the same second line. So the first line is different, but they have the same second line. 10:6, blessings are upon the head of the just, but violence covereth the mouth of the wicked. 10:11 says, the mouth of a righteous man is a well of life, but violence covereth the mouth of the wicked. 10:8, he says, the wise in heart will receive commandments, but a prating fool shall fall. 10:10 says, he that winketh with the eye causeth sorrow, but a prating fool shall fall. Now, we'll talk about this later when we get to that section, but what does it mean? I used to read this when I was a kid, and I would think, he that winketh with the eye causeth sorrow. And there's 2 or 3 times in the book of Proverbs it'll talk about winking with the eye, and it's used in a very negative way, as if wrong even. So what's up with that? Is it wrong to wink with your eye? I don't know if you can. I don't know how people do that without. I'm the guy that I have to cock my cheek up to wink. But so what's he talking about?
I believe some people do wink, but they're sending a signal that's not very honoring.
That's the idea. It's a deceitful thing. In fact, sometimes people will, maybe they say something and they're, maybe I'm talking to Levi here and I'm going to say something that I'm going to try to trick him or make him believe something that's not true. And I look over at Bob and it's letting him know. And so, yeah, that's the idea. It's a deceitful thing. It would be, in fact, when we study that particular proverb, it'll be under the category of honesty. And so it's not just saying it's wrong to wink with the eye. He's saying it's wrong to deceive people. Just lost my place. 15:33. These are, this is the last one, the last pair of proverbs that have a different first line but the same second line. 15:33 says, the fear of the Lord is the instruction of wisdom, and before honor is humility. 18:12 says, before destruction the heart of man is haughty, and before honor is humility. Same exact second line, slightly different idea in the first line. And then finally, this category of repetitions. Some proverbs have one line that is almost the same as another proverb. It might be first or second, but I'll give you just a few examples of these. Proverbs 11:13. A talebearer revealeth secrets, but he that is of a faithful spirit concealeth the matter. 20:19, though, says, he that goeth about as a talebearer revealeth secrets. Therefore meddle not with him that flattereth with his lips. The idea there of a talebearer being somebody who reveals secrets, that's kind of the similarity. Proverbs 11:21. Though hand join in hand, the wicked shall not be unpunished, but the seed of the righteous shall be delivered. Proverbs 16, verse 5. Every one that is proud in heart is an abomination to the Lord. Though hand join in hand, he shall not be unpunished. So first line in that first one, second line in the other. Though hand join in hand, he shall not be unpunished. What does that mean, by the way? I used an illustration of this years ago. I was writing an article. I think I was when I was up in the St. Louis area in Collinsville, Illinois. You guys ever play Red Rover? Anybody ever play that as a child? And you Red Rover, send Billy right over, and if your name's called, you got to run over. And what do? They join hands. Yeah, sometimes they clothesline you. Billy, sorry, I didn't mean to touch on a nerve there, Billy. Apparently, Billy's got some issues from childhood that we'll talk later, okay? But they join hands, right? And you're trying to break through, and if you do, I think I'm trying to remember now myself. You join that group, right? Okay, yeah. And I guess if you don't, you're out. I think that's the way it goes. So, but to keep the person from getting through your line, hand joins hand. You link together, and God says you can link together the whole world, and it won't make a difference. The wicked shall not go unpunished. So I remember that because I was. Sometimes you write something or say something as a preacher or writer, and you think, I like that. And nobody else really even notices. And that was the case with this. But I put in my article, I thought it was kind of clever, but nobody even really, at least they didn't say anything to me. But I said, one day, and in a sense in life in general, but certainly at the day of judgment, God's coming over. And though hand join in hand, you're not going to keep judgment from happening. The wicked shall not go unpunished. I love that statement that occurs twice in the book of Proverbs. Some more of these. 12:14, a man shall be satisfied with good by the fruit of his mouth, and the recompense of a man's hand shall be rendered unto him. 13:2 says, a man shall eat good by the fruit of his mouth, but the soul of the transgressors shall eat violence. 14:31, he that oppresseth the poor reproacheth his maker, but he that honoreth him hath mercy on the poor. He that honoreth his maker has mercy on the poor, in other words. 17:5, whoso mocketh the poor reproacheth his maker. So in one it says oppresses the poor, another it says mocks the poor. And then it goes on to say in 17:5, and he that is glad at calamities shall not be unpunished. Here's a familiar proverb, 16:18. Pride goeth before destruction, and an haughty spirit before a fall. 18:12 says, before destruction, the heart of a man is haughty, and before honor is humility. So very similar idea there. 19:12, the king's wrath is as the roaring of a lion, but his favor is as dew upon the grass. 20 verse 2 says, the fear of a king is as the roaring of a lion. Whoso provoketh him to anger sinneth against his own soul. So several examples there of repetition that you see in the book, and you'll see this sometimes when we're covering. Sometimes a proverb fits into one of our categories that we'll look at. Sometimes it fits in another one, and it's just pretty much equally well in both of those categories. Now, next, I want to look at some proverbs that they're not always quotes, but I think we can say with most of these, I left out just a couple that I felt like I couldn't be 100% sure that the New Testament reference was alluding back to a proverb. I felt like it was, but since I wasn't as sure of it. So these are the more obvious ones. But these are some examples of proverbs that are quoted or at least alluded to in the New Testament. And this is where I'm going to lean on some readers. And I tell you what I will do is I will read the proverb, and then I'll get a reader for each one of these New Testament references. So, who wants to read first? Levi? Okay. Thank you. Romans 3:15. It's an easy one. It's a short verse. Bob, you had your hand up, right? So I'll get you do one here in just a moment. Tell me when you get there, and then I'll do the proverb. Romans 3, verse 15. You got it? So here's what the proverb says. For their feet run to evil and make haste to shed blood. Romans 3:15 says, their feet are swift to shed blood. So it seems clear reference there back to Proverbs 1:16. All right, Brother Bob, if you would, Romans 12:16. Billy, you can grab Hebrews 12:5 and 6. I saw you just salivating there to get a verse to read, right? David, do you mind getting one? Revelation 3, verse 19. And Brother Chris, go ahead and get over to the book of James, if you would, chapter 4. You got yours, Bob? Okay, go ahead and read that.
Romans 12:16.
Yes, sir.
Be of the same mind one toward another. Set not your mind on high things, but condescend to the things that are lowly. Be not wise in your own conceits.
All right, did you catch that last phrase? Be not wise in your own conceits. Here's what Proverbs 3, verse 7 says. Be not wise in thine own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. So reference there in Romans 12. Billy, you got Hebrews 12, 5 and 6.
And you have forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as the sons. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves and chastens, discourages his son.
All right. It's interesting to me that, of course, we don't know for sure who wrote the book of Hebrews, but if it was, in fact, Paul, then Paul was a pretty regular student of Proverbs because a lot of these come from Paul's writings. So he says, don't forget the exhortation that speaks to you as unto children. My son, despise not thou the chastening of the Lord, and so on. Here's what Proverbs 3, 11 and 12 says. And this is the reference in Hebrews 12 is, I don't know if I'd call it a word-for-word quote, but it's very close. I'd have to go back and look. Might be following pretty accurately with like the Septuagint translation. But here's what Proverbs 3, 11 and 12 says. My son, despise not the chastening of the Lord, neither be weary of his correction. For whom the Lord loveth, he correcteth, even as a father the son, in whom he delighteth. So you have that idea there. And then going with that, another reference in the writings of John the Apostle is the reference David's got over in Revelation 3, verse 19.
As many as I love, I rebuke and chasten, but be zealous therefore and repent.
All right, so as many as I love, I rebuke and chasten. That's one, I don't know if I can say 100% for sure, but it does seem to be a throwback, or at least an allusion to Proverbs 3, 11 and 12. Chris, did I have you in James 4? James 4, verse 6. Let me get another. Robert, 1 Peter 5, verse 5. And perhaps you've noticed before that these two New Testament verses are very similar, and they actually are both taken from Proverbs chapter 3. Let's see. Chris, you got that, James 4, 6?
But he gives more grace. Therefore he says, God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble.
All right, God resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. Similar wording in 1 Peter 5, verse 5, Brother Robert.
Likewise, ye youngers, submit yourselves unto the elder. Yea, all of you be subject one to another, and be clothed with humility. For God resisteth the proud, and giveth grace to the humble.
All right, so there it is again. God resisteth the proud, giveth grace to the humble. Here's Proverbs 3:34. Surely he scorneth the scorners, but he giveth grace unto the lowly. So reference there in James and 1 Peter. Let me get somebody to get 1 Peter 4. Billy, all right, 1 Peter 4, verse 8. And got a reference from Romans 12. All right, David, Romans, just lost my place, 12:17. 1 Thessalonians 5:15. Who wants to get that? Okay, Brother Martin. 1 Thessalonians 5:15. I got one more from this proverb. If I can get the reference here. 1 Peter 3:9. All right, Robert. And then let me give one more out here just to get us ahead a little bit. Levi, do you mind doing James 1:19? All right, who had 1 Peter 4:8? Is that you, Billy? On the word what? I still didn't understand you.
Reverend.
Brethren?
Reverend.
Oh, reverend.
Okay. Continue with that one.
Sorry, I'm just not hearing well tonight.
Reverend. He, we were talking about that one time on your lesson, and you were asking if it was anywhere in the New Testament or something.
The word reverend.
So, can I read this?
Am I saying the wrong word?
No, I am. It's, you know, I feel like the Yankee redneck.
Reverend, like the title? Is that what you're saying?
He spelled it.
It's okay, and above all
Am,
things,
I'm sorry, am I?
it's just me. And above all things, fervent,
Oh, fervent.
heat for one another, for love will cover a multitude of sins.
Fervent. There we go. Okay.
It's okay.
I'm sorry. Okay, yes. Above all things, have fervent charity among yourselves. And really, catch that last phrase, for charity, which is just another way of saying love, shall cover the multitude of sins. Proverbs 10, verse 12 says, hatred stirreth up strifes, but love covereth all sins. Romans 12:17. Who got that one? Okay.
Recompense to no man evil for evil. Provide things honest in the sight of all men.
So he says, don't recompense to anyone evil for evil. You provide things honest in the sight of all men. Now, going with this, 1 Thessalonians 5:15. Is that, Martin, is that yours? Okay.
See that no one renders evil for evil to anyone, but always pursue what is good both for yourselves and for all.
All right, so don't render evil for evil unto any man. So again, you may have noticed that before, the similarity between those verses. And then 1 Peter 3:9. Was that Robert? 1 Peter 3:9.
Not rendering evil for evil, or railing for railing, but contrariwise blessings, knowing that ye are thereunto called, that ye should inherit a blessing.
All right, so don't render evil for evil. So again, 3 different times you see that. Now, here's the proverb, Proverbs 17:13. Whoso rewardeth evil for good, evil shall not depart from his house. So again, more of an allusion than a quote, but does seem to be an allusion to that. Now, James 1, verse 19. Levi, you got that one?
So then, my beloved brethren, will every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath.
Swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. Proverbs 17:27. He that hath knowledge spareth his words, and a man of understanding is of an excellent spirit. All right, David, are you still in Romans 12 by any chance? Read, just to remind us of 12:17. Recompense to no man evil for evil, provide things honest in the sight of all men. And then read 12:19 for us, if you would, please, David.
Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord.
Okay, so he says, don't avenge yourselves, give place unto wrath, because it's written, vengeance is mine, I will repay. Proverbs 20, verse 22 says, say not thou, I will recompense evil, but wait on the Lord, and he shall save thee. Now, Matthew 5:44. Get somebody to read that. Okay, Bob, get that one, Matthew 5:44. David, you still in Romans 12? Okay, I'll get you to do verse 20 in just a moment. Brother Jimmy, if you don't mind, 2 Peter 2:22, please. Bob, are you already at Matthew 5:44?
Yes.
Okay.
I say to you, love your enemies and pray for them that persecute you.
Is that 5:44?
Matthew
Yes.
5, verse 44.
Yes, sir.
But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for them that persecute you.
Oh, you got your ASV tonight, don't you?
I'm special.
It's a little bit different, which, I mean, it still works for what we're I'm talking about. But let me give you the King James. He says, I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. That's the King James coming from Textus Receptus, American Standard coming from Critical Text. Thank you. I just went blank on it there. So that's a textual difference on the Greek version, not version. What do you call it?
Underlying Greek text.
The underlying Greek text. Thank you. So, but you'll see the similarity here in just a moment. Romans 12:20 is also, you'll see similarity. Go ahead, Brother David, if you would, please.
Therefore, if thine enemy hungry, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in doing so thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head.
So if your enemy's hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. In so doing, you'll heap coals of fire on his head. And of course, Jesus says, love your enemies, bless those that curse you, do good to those that hate you, pray for those who despitefully use you. Proverbs 25:21 and 22. If thine enemy be hungry, give him bread to eat. And if he be thirsty, give him water to drink. For thou shalt heap coals of fire upon his head, and the Lord shall reward thee. So you can see the similarity there. And then 2 Peter 2, verse 22. Brother Jimmy.
It has happened to them according to the true proverb, the dog returns to his own vomit, and a sow, having washed, to her wallowing in vomit.
All right, so he says it's happened unto them according to the true proverb, and sure enough, Proverbs 26:11 says, as a dog returneth to his vomit, so a fool returneth to his folly. Very graphic illustration there to show a fool just going right back to the same foolishness. You know, we sometimes say, in fact, y'all ever heard the Ballad of the Blue Cyclone? Anybody ever heard that? That's Ray Stevens. Probably a lot of folks my age and maybe even older are familiar with and appreciate Ray Stevens. But there's this scene in there where he's going to go get some buddies to help him get his revenge on the Blue Cyclone, and his buddy ends up just abandoning him. And the Blue Cyclone says, "It seems to me that some guys never learn." Well, that's Proverbs 26:11. Some guys never learn. Like just the disgusting. Here's a dog going back to his vomit. It says, so the fool just keeps going back to his foolishness. He just never learns. And in 2 Peter 2:22, the Holy Spirit uses that, again, very graphic illustration, this time talking about a child of God who just turns and walks away from the Lord. And he says it's like getting a pig washed up and just squeaky clean. You give them a chance, where are they going? They're going to go right back to the mud pit. And that dog's going to go right back to the vomit. Graphic illustrations for, well, what's very graphically foolish decisions. All right, and then this next section is, again, this comes from, and again, I adapted some of those, if nothing else, but when I'm just trying to correct some of the scripture reference typos, but some of those I added and took away a little bit here and there. But this, again, is adapted from Brother Winton's commentary. But he references an author named Hanneberg, but he gives 5 different classes of Proverbs. And I'll read these just for time's sake, because I know we're about to run out of time in our class. He gives 5 different classes, as he calls it, of Proverbs. And I'll go ahead and give you the list, and then I'll give you some examples to sort of flesh it out a little bit. Historical Proverbs, metaphorical Proverbs, what he calls enigmatic Proverbs, parabolic Proverbs, and didactic Proverbs. And now to explain those a little bit further, historical Proverbs would be something proverbialized, some kind of proverbialized history. Now, he gives a good example. Well, it's in Winton's commentary. I don't know if he's quoting this from Hanneberg or if this is from Brother Winton, but it's a great historical proverb. We still use it to this day, but it's based on a historical event. We sometimes will talk about remember the Alamo. Remember the Alamo. That's a proverb in our culture even to this day. because it goes back to that battle at the literal Alamo. Just a couple of examples to help you understand this. 1 Samuel 10, verse 12. This is in the context of Saul's, actually right around the time Saul's going to be becoming king. And just read you the latter part of the verse, which is what we're looking at. Therefore it became a proverb, is Saul also among the prophets? Saul came along prophesying, and so it became a proverb. Is Saul also among the prophets? So that would be this historical class of Proverbs. Isaiah 14:4 says, God speaking to Isaiah, that thou shalt take up this proverb against the king of Babylon and say, how hath the oppressor ceased? The golden city ceased. It was a historical proverb. I don't know if I'm looking back at this one. This is where I made a slight change, addition, I guess you call it. But I'm thinking about this now, and I'm not sure this classifies as a historical proverb, but at least per se. But in 2 Samuel 2:23, it definitely classifies as a proverb. Maybe it's sort of a metaphorical. It might be better in the category of metaphorical. Let me just hold off on that one, because I think it might be better in metaphorical. I'm not sure what I was thinking there. Metaphorical proverbs are those characterized by the metaphorical element, metaphor being where you have a word or phrase that is used for one kind of object or idea in place of another to suggest similarity between the two. And you know, in English grammar class, we learn there's just a slight difference between a metaphor and a simile. What's the difference?
I think a metaphor can have more parts to it.
Um,
Just one comparison.
I don't know. You may be right about that. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, I was going to say it's most of our young folks that have been in school and grammar classes. That's how they taught us to recognize simile from metaphor. Simile uses like or as. Jesus says, "Woe unto you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites! You are like unto whited sepulchres." But sometimes you have somebody, such as in the Psalms, and David says, "But I'm a worm and no man." You know, bless his heart, did he think he was a worm? No, he's using that as a metaphor to say, I'm low. You know, we sometimes use the expression in the South, lower than dirt. I don't know if they use that in the North, Bob, but I was telling my friend Brent about how I sometimes will mention an expression, and I like to ask Bob, do they say that up in the North? But lower than dirt, you know, we sometimes say that. That's kind of what David is saying when he says, I'm a worm and no man. But if you use like or as, that's simile. So that's metaphorical Proverbs. Couple of examples. Proverbs 1:17. Surely in vain the net is spread in the sight of any bird. Well, he's talking to this young man and advising him to watch out for running with this certain kind of crowd, this certain kind of people, because you're going to end up in a snare and a trap. But you should know about this because it's right there. I'm telling you about it. And you know, it's like you open up a cage and say, come on, little birdie, come into the cage. I'm not going to hurt you. Well, even a bird's not that stupid. But some humans act like they are. Proverbs 6, verse 6. Go to the ant, thou sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise. So, you know, it could be a proverbial saying, be like the ant. Be an ant. That kind of thing. Proverbs 17:12. Let a bear robbed of her whelps meet a man rather than a fool in his folly. Proverbs 19:13, a foolish son is the calamity of his father, and the contentions of a wife are a continual dropping. So metaphorical proverbs. The one I was going to mention earlier that would probably be more of a metaphorical proverb. It's used 3 times, right? No, 4. 4 times in 2 Samuel. 2:23, 3:27, 4:6, 20 verse 10. But there's an expression that is used, and it seems to be like a proverbial expression where someone is killed, but it says, and maybe you can remember this if you're familiar with those sections, someone gets It'll say, so-and-so say, Joab smote Abner. What does it say? Anybody remember this? I remember it, even if I had not studied those sections, I remember it so well because my friend Christopher Makabanji that I've mentioned to y'all before, he learned English from the King James Version. And he used to, sometimes I'd be aggravating him, and he would say, Chad, I'm going to smite you under the fifth rib. That's a King James way of saying it. But it says that 4 different times in the book of 2 Samuel. And it's kind of a proverbial way of saying, well, in fact, I think I wrote in my notes to quote, Adam Clark in his commentary says it's just a different way of saying, we might say it to put it a little more nicely, eviscerated. He got his belly ripped up. He got killed. I mean, really, that's the bottom line. Somebody, you get smote in the fifth rib, you dead. But I remember it so well because Christopher would sometimes get aggravated and tell me, I'm going to smite you in the fifth rib. And he was just dead serious. I mean, because he had read that. And sometimes his English was hilarious because most of his English was learned reading an English King James Bible and comparing it with his Swahili Bible. But those would be some metaphorical proverbs. Enigmatic proverbs. These are in the form of riddles or obscure questions. They require a little more thought, maybe a lot more thought to understand, deeper thought at least to understand. Here are a couple of examples. Proverbs 30, 15 and 16. The horse leech hath 2 daughters, crying, give, give. He goes on to say, there are 3 things that are never satisfied. Yea, 4 things say not, it is enough. The grave, the barren womb, the earth that is not filled with water, and the fire that saith not, it is enough. And the idea there being, when you unpack this all, is those 4 things, they have one thing in common. They are insatiable. And he says, it's kind of the idea of learn to be content. Sometimes we need to learn to be content, not just insatiably after money or insatiably after happiness or whatever it might be. Sometimes, we need to learn to be like Paul. He says, in whatsoever state I am, I've learned to be content. Here's another example, same chapter of Proverbs 30, 21 through 23. For 3 things the earth is disquieted, and for 4 which it cannot bear. For a servant when he reigneth, and a fool when he is filled with meat. For an odious woman when she is married, and an handmaid that is heir to her mistress. There are some things that are just hard to put up with and be around for very long. And you know what? There's some people that are hard to put up with or be around for very long. And so the idea there from the wise man, ultimately from the Holy Spirit, is don't be that person. Learn to get along with people and not be somebody that's such a pain that nobody wants to be around you. So enigmatic proverbs, a little bit more thought required there. Parabolic proverbs express truth in allegorical form, such as Proverbs 9:1, wisdom hath builded her house, she has hewn out her 7 pillars. And then didactic proverbs are just devoted to the teaching of high points of morals, both religious and behavioral morals. And really, for an example of this, you can look at pretty much nearly the entire section of Proverbs chapters 1 through 9. Those are didactic teaching style proverbs. Anything else before we dismiss our class here? And we'll have just a few announcements before our devotional period. Well, thank y'all very much. We'll pick up there, take up our parable, as we say, God willing, next week.